Assignments. If you live in BC and you pay any attention to the real estate industry at all, you've probably heard this word thrown around a couple of times. But what exactly is an assignment? Whether it's the first time you've heard that word or you're pretty familiar with what they are, in this video I'm going to be covering everything to do with assignments. So if you want to learn more, stay tuned because it's coming at you right after this. What's going on, guys? Alex Dunbar here with the Dunbar Real Estate Group and Remax Treeline Realty based out of the Surrey-Langley areas. And in this video, I'm going to give you the A to Z on assignments. If this is your first time on my channel, I make weekly real estate videos related to the BC and Canadian real estate market, as well as showcase community tours across the Lower Mainland. So if that's something you're interested in seeing more of, I suggest you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you're notified whenever I come out with a new video. And before I get into it, I'll ask that you do one thing for me, and that's to hit that like button so the algorithm will push this video out to more individuals who want to learn more about real estate here in BC. But moving on, I'm going to cover a number of different topics related to assignments today. First of all, giving you a definition, then going over an example, then looking at the two types, pre-sale versus resale, moving on to the fees associated with assignments, and then finally finishing it off with the pros and the cons. So to start it off, the definition of an assignment is a legal sales transaction whereby the original purchaser, known as the assignor of a property, assigns or sells and thereby transfers their rights and obligations under the original contract to a new purchaser known as the assignee. This occurs prior to the original buyer closing on the property and often before the home is complete if it's a pre-sale. And the quick definition in layman's terms is that you sell your contract for the purchase of a home to someone else, hopefully for what is a profit called the lift. So because that might be a little bit confusing, I want to give you an example. So the assignor, who is the original purchaser that bought a unit from the developer at an agreed upon rate of $600,000, paid a 15% deposit of $90,000. 1 year later, prior to completion, that original purchaser, again the assignor, decides that they want to assign their contract. And this means that they'll transfer their rights and obligations to the new purchaser. And this is carried out for a decided for lift, in this case $60,000. This lift is the amount on top of the original purchase price, so the total new purchase price would be $660,000. So the assignor then goes out and finds an assignee, which is the new buyer who wants to purchase the rights to the contract. Because unfortunately, that individual missed out on the pre-sale, but now they're interested in buying into the building. The assignee then agrees to pay the assignor the $60,000 lift plus the original $90,000 deposit, making a total of $150,000. And this sum of money can be provided to a number of different people. However, we'll save that for later in the video. But a lot of times it can be either held by the lawyer or paid directly to the original assigner. So once the building is actually complete, the assignee now owes the developer the remainder of the balance. So in this case, it would be $510,000, which in combination with the $150,000 they paid to the assignor makes the $660,000 total. So hopefully that rundown gives you a clear picture of how exactly an assignment works, but now let's move on to the different types. So we've got pre-sale and resale. Pre-sale being the more common of the two. And the example that I just previously gave was an example of a pre-sale assignment. So as you may have noticed from my example, there is three parties involved with a pre-sale assignment. That is the original seller, who's the developer, the original purchaser, who is now selling, which is the assignor, and the new buyer, who is the assignee. Something to keep in mind here is that you cannot assign a unit without the original seller's consent. And in the case of a pre-sale, this is the developer. Now moving on to resale assignments, they're quite similar, however they do have some differences. So once again, the seller always has to provide consent prior to assigning. Typically, when you're writing an offer on a property that you want to have the ability to sign later on, you have to do three things. Number one, cross out section 20A on the contract of purchase and sale. This outlines some of the terms, conditions, and restrictions around assignments, and also essentially states that if there's any profit made on the assignment, it will all go to the seller. Part two is you need an acknowledgement condition, and this will be put into your subjects and conditions section. And this just acknowledges that the seller has received and signed the third and final part. And this is the notice to the seller regarding assignment terms. And as mentioned, this must be signed by the seller. And all this really is a disclosure document. So in the case where all three previous steps have been mentioned, the new buyer wouldn't have to ask for consent after subjects have been removed and prior to completion. However, in the case that the buyer didn't get these things done but decided later on that they wanted to assign the contract, they would then have to go back to the seller and ask for permission. And I can tell you right now, if they didn't agree to it at the very beginning, not many sellers are willing to let you assign your contract and keep all the profits yourself. But but you may be able to negotiate something with them, such as splitting the profits. And before moving on to the fees related to assignments, I just want to touch on some of the reasons why people do assign contracts. So here in the Lower Mainland, we've had our fair share of hot markets. And during these times, assignments have been extremely profitable for investors, as well as for those who didn't even intend to invest in the first place. Because essentially, it allows them to put down a deposit on a property without qualifying for the mortgage and watch their money grow, at least in the times where the market's been going up. And for many, it's paid off huge. Just imagine, you put a $20,000 deposit down on a pre-sale unit, and all of a sudden 2 years later, you're able to assign it for over $100,000 more? Who wouldn't want to be taking advantage of this? But not so fast. It doesn't always work out that way. On the other side of the coin, sometimes people need to assign their contract because they can no longer complete on the mortgage due to life circumstances or some sort of financial means. And in cases such as this, at least it gives you an out so you don't end up losing your deposit. But anyways, I'll touch on those things a little bit later when I look at the pros and cons. So you just heard my little spiel about how people are making hundreds of thousands of dollars with assignments, and now you're all excited and you want to figure out how you can go about it. However, what I haven't mentioned yet is the fees associated with them, and these can add up quickly. So first of all, typically the developer is going to have an assignment fee. Generally, this ranges between 1% to 3%, however I've seen it as high as 5%. In some cases, there's also a flat fee, but this is less common. What I will mention though is when the market's hot, developers typically increase their assignment fees. But when things slow down, sometimes they even remove them completely. But you're going to be able to find this in your disclosure statement. One quick little tip here is that you can actually negotiate your assignment fee. Not all developers are going to budge, and it really depends what type of market you're in, but it never hurts to ask. Next, you have your real estate commission. You're going to have to hire a realtor to sell the property. And depending on the price of your property, this isn't necessarily that cheap. Moving on, you're going to have to pay GST on the lift. So this is a more recent introduction, but if you don't know, typically on a pre-sale or new build property, you have to pay 5% GST on the purchase price. But as the assignor, you're only required to pay 5% on the lift, or the amount that you're selling it for over your original purchase price. So once again, you're probably going to have to tack on a couple $1,000s more in fees. You're also going to have to pay income tax on the lift. So depending on your income tax bracket, this could be a significant amount. And lastly, you're going to have to pay legal fees for conveyancing. And for this, you're going to have to hire a lawyer or notary. So with some of the more recent rule changes to assignment fees, it's made them much less attractive than in the past. So it's extremely important you take these things into account if you're planning on assigning your unit later on, because the last thing you want to do is get hit with any surprises. And lastly, let's move on to the pros and cons. As the assignor or seller, you're going to get your deposit back and can often negotiate a greater price on top of that, especially when there's higher demand for those units. Second, the earlier on you're able to purchase in a project is going to allow you to more than likely get a better price than later on. The reason being is that a lot of times developers will sell in phases, and as they move through the phases, prices tend to get more expensive. So if you're able to get in early, you're going to get the best price, and in turn you're going to be able to generate a greater profit. Number 3 from the assigner side is that you don't have to qualify for a mortgage. So this is going to allow you to essentially purchase an expensive asset with a relatively small amount of money. And I mean this in relativity. For instance, if it was a $500,000 project and they were allowing a 5% deposit or even a 10% deposit, you're able to lock this up for between $25,000 and $50,000. And if that project's not done for another 2, 3, 4, or even 5 years, there is a ton of room for appreciation. And in comparison to purchasing a resale investment property, you're not going to have to pay a mortgage. So I'm sure you can see the attractiveness here. And lastly, you can get out of paying the majority of the GST, because this can come as a significant cost. Once again, think about it being a $500,000 property. 5% GST on top of that would be another $25,000. Moving on, looking at the pros from the assignees or the new buyer side, number 1 being the fact that it allows for a quicker possession versus buying an actual pre-sale unit. Since construction's already underway, and it could be significantly underway, you're going to be able to take possession of the home much sooner. Benefit number 2 is that if the property is under $750,000, you're going to be exempt from paying property transfer tax. And you'll also be given a partial exemption if it's under $800,000. But based on the fact that property transfer tax is 1% on the first $200,000 and 2% on the balance up to $2 million, you're looking at a potential savings of up to $13,000. And benefit number 3 from the purchaser side is that you can often find some great deals. And most commonly, this is on units that are very close to completion. The reason being is that if that original original purchaser never had the intention on actually completing on the unit and only bought it for assignment purposes, this means they're going to be far more incentivized to get rid of it. And the closer and closer they get to that completion date, the more and more they'll probably be dropping the price. Because A, either they don't want to get a mortgage, or even worse, they can't, and B, they don't want to pay the GST. So my suggestion to you is to always look for assignments that are near completion. And in my opinion, that would be somewhere from 1 to 3 months out. But moving on, let's look at the cons. Con number 1 from the assigner side is that you have to get the developer's consent. So not all developers allow assignments. However, more often than not, they just have rules regarding the restriction. And these are typically that the project has to be sold out or at least the same type of unit. The reason being is that the developer doesn't want to compete with you. If you purchased a 1-bedroom unit and the developer still has 5 1-bedroom units left to sell, they don't want to have to compete with you. So until they've sold out of them, they're more than likely not going to allow you to assign your unit. Con number 2 is assignment fees. As I already mentioned previously, you're going to have to pay the developer typically between 1 to 3% of the sale price. Number 3 is that there's typically restrictions around how they can be marketed, and sometimes they're not even allowed to be put on the MLS. So prior to marketing, you're going to have to get consent from the developer, and they don't always make things very easy. But again, it's going to vary from project to project. Additionally, assignments just typically aren't as attractive of a purchase to buyers. One of those reasons being is that they typically can't get in to see the unit, and more often than not, the showroom's already been closed and all they can rely on is digital renderings and floor plans. Next, on top of the assignment fees, there's other fees related to selling. I've already covered these earlier in the video, so I'm not going to go over them again. And lastly, there's one more major risk with assigning a unit, and that's the fact that you need to make sure that the buyer is willing and able to take on all the conditions and terms within the contract. If the new buyer does not follow through with completion of the sale, the responsibility to close typically falls back on the assigner, which would be you. So it's extremely important you work with a realtor that knows what they're doing, because assignment contracts are very different from regular contracts. They're far more complex and less straightforward, so you need to make sure that your realtor is familiar and knows what they're doing, or you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. But that's about going to wrap things up for today's video. So if you did get any value out of this, all I ask is that you hit that thumbs up button. And if you have any questions or concerns, leave them down below and I'll be happy to get back to you. Additionally, if you are interested in seeing more videos just like this one, I suggest you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you're notified whenever I put out a new video. And lastly, if you're looking to purchase a pre-sale unit in order to assign it, or looking to purchase an assignment yourself, or realistically buy or sell any real estate here in the Lower Mainland, you can scroll down and hit the first link in the description to book a call with me to discuss your options at your earliest convenience. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.